The dwarves have had some rotten luck over the ages. Nogrod and Belagost were destroyed following the War of Wrath. Khazad-dûm was lost to maybe the last remaining Balrog. Dragons drove them from the Grey Mountains and even from Erebor for a while, and while we don't get specifics, we know that the dwarves of the East faced cataclysms of their own. As a result, the dwarves were often a people on the search for a new home. But there's one dwarven land that, although it wasn't the richest or the greatest, it was perhaps the safest, for it was never lost. In this video, we talk about the Iron Hills, the longest surviving dwarven realm. In the far east of the Westlands, surrounded by seemingly nothing of interest, we have the hill chain known as the Iron Hills. Just by looking at the map, you can see that the Iron Hills are fairly large, far larger than any other hill chain in the Westlands, and if the drawings are to be taken as an accurate description, the Iron Hills don't seem to be gently rising slopes, but rather almost mountain-like in shape and size. It was actually believed at one point that the Iron Hills were remnants of the Iron Mountains, the northern mountains that Morgoth raised to protect his icebound fortresses. But some of Tolkien's later writings revealed that the Iron Hills always existed as a separate formation. We know this because the Iron Hills received their first and only residence in the First Age. Durin awoke at Gundabad and made his capital at Khazad-dûm in the Misty Mountains, but under him the Longbeards spread out, not just through the Misty Mountains, but also east. The Longbeards claimed the Grey Mountains, but we're not sure if any real permanent settlements were made there because they were considered wild and unexplored even in the Third Age. But further to the east, the Longbeards claimed the Iron Hills and are said to have started a colony there. We're not sure if these hills were rich in gold or gems or other precious metals, but as the name gives away, we know that the Iron Hills were rich in iron. It's not exactly a glamorous metal, especially when compared to the mithril that was being dug up in Khazad-dûm, but iron is always useful. The Longbeards recognised this, so they built a road from their capital to the Iron Hills that ran through Mirkwood. You might know it as the Old Forest Road, but it was once known as the Men I Naugrim, the Dwarf Road. Through the relatively peaceful years of the First and early Second Age, the road saw plenty of traffic running between Khazad-dûm and the Iron Hills. Unfortunately, all good times come to an end. After the War of the Elves and Sauron in the middle of the Second Age, Sauron developed a grudge against Durin's folk because of their participation in the war. He then ordered his servants to attack them wherever they could, and the Orcs of the North, long directionless, were glad to receive reinforcements and guidance. They attacked the Misty Mountains, and although they had no chance of conquering Khazad-dûm itself, they were able to take Gundabad and infest the previously empty Grey Mountains. At the same time, Sauron's servants from the east were devastating Rhovanion and the dwarves' Northmen allies. As a result, Khazad-dûm is said to have been cut off from the Iron Hills for a time. We're not sure how long this period lasted, but one would assume that, at the very least, contact had been restored by the Third Age. The Iron Hills don't get mentioned again for thousands of years. When Khazad-dûm fell to the Balrog and became Moria in 1981 of the Third Age, the dwarves, led by a young King Thrain I, wandered around for 18 years. Despite having a perfectly good home in the east, the Longbeards of Moria don't seem to have regarded the Iron Hills as fit for the heart of a kingdom. Instead, they founded a new home at Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, so fairly close to the Iron Hills. This was only temporary, for by 2210 most of the dwarves, including the new King Thorin I, had migrated to the little explored and metal-rich Grey Mountains. Once again, the dwarven desire for greater halls would be their undoing. Although several kings had successful reigns in the Grey Mountains, towards the end of the reign of King Nain II, dragons started attacking from the northern wastes. This was the War of the Dwarves and Dragons, lasting from 2570 to 2589, when King Dain I and his second son Thror, spelt with an F, were killed outside their halls by a cold drake. This was the breaking point for the dwarves, and most of them abandoned the Grey Mountains. Thror, spelt with a TH, the eldest son of Dain II, would return to Erebor and become the famed King Under the Mountain. But for many dwarves, it seems that safety was now a greater priority than wealth, and where was safer than the one dwarven realm that had not fallen? The Iron Hills. So as Thror made his way back to Erebor, his youngest brother, Gror, who was merely 27 years old, led a second group to the Iron Hills where he became its lord. The next 2 centuries were a time of prosperity for the entire region. There was plenty of trade between Erebor and the Iron Hills. Located between them were plenty of Northmen, such as those of Dale and Laketown, who also grew powerful thanks to the proximity of the dwarves, and they began to drive back the peoples of the east. Unfortunately for the dwarves of Erebor, their wealth would be their undoing again. Smaug, last of the Great Dragons, attacked Erebor in 2770 and drove out the dwarves, including King Thror and all of his family. This saw yet another great migration to the Iron Hills, as most of the dwarves that escaped fled there. However, Thror and his closest followers went away south and ended up making a rudimentary dwelling in Dunland. I really don't know what the kings of Durin's folk had against the Iron Hills, which resulted in all of them going anywhere but there. 20 years later, an old, desperate, and probably a little crazy Thror tried his luck at retaking Moria. He gathered an army and... No, I'm just joking. He went with a single servant, wandered in, and was promptly killed and mutilated by Azog, an orc who had proclaimed himself King of Moria. This insult caused Thrain II, now king, to call upon all of the dwarves for a war of vengeance. Not just the dwarves of the Iron Hills, but also the dwarves of the other 6 clans. Thus, in 2793 began the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, a brutal conflict that raged the length of the Misty Mountains from Gundabad to Moria. In 2799, the climactic battle, Azanul Bazaar, was fought outside Moria, where the Orcs had withdrawn for a final stand. The dwarves attacked, but there were more Orcs than expected, as Azog had been holding back many reserves. It was a long, brutal battle with enormous casualties on both sides, and it looked like it could go either way. That is, until the dwarves of the Iron Hills arrived, who were somehow late to the battle. These were led by Nyan, the son of Gror, and with him at the lead, they carved a path through the Orcs until they reached the very gates of Moria. There, Nyan roared for Azog to come forth, and the Great Orc came out with his personal guard. They engaged Nyan and his vanguard, and during the fight, the two faced off and duelled. Unfortunately, Nyan was already tired and half-blind with rage, whereas Azog was fresh and full of cunning. At one point, Nyan aims a mighty blow at Azog, but Azog trips him and takes a swing at his neck. Although Nyan's armor turns aside the edge, the blow is so great that it breaks his neck, killing him instantly. Unfortunately for Azog, his triumph is short-lived. He looks around, sees the battle has turned against him, and seeing that his personal guard is dead, he tries to flee into Moria, but he is run down and then killed by a young Dain Ironfoot. The Battle of Azanul Bazaar is won, but the dwarves have taken enormous losses. Thrain is at least glad that Moria can be reclaimed, but he is swiftly shut down by Dain, who says that he could feel the presence of Durin's Bane at Moria's gate. To his credit, Thrain takes the advice and the dwarves disperse. Thrain ends up in the Blue Mountains, and Dain leads his soldiers back to the Iron Hills. Vengeance has been achieved, but Durin's folk are still without a main home, as the Blue Mountains, like the Iron Hills, are mostly just rich in iron these days. A few years later, in 2805, Gror, the Lord of the Iron Hills, dies. He is 242 and has ruled the Iron Hills for a massive 215 years. As his son Nyan is already dead, the lordship of the Iron Hills goes straight to his grandson, the young Dain Ironfoot. During Dain's reign, the Iron Hills would play an extremely important role for the security of all of the Westlands. As said by Gandalf, with the fall of Erebor and the Men of Dale, the only bulwark preventing Sauron from potentially sending servants through the north to re-establish Angmar was the Iron Hills. This is why Gandalf is determined to get rid of Smaug and reinstall the dwarves at Erebor. Speaking of getting rid of Smaug, this is achieved in 2941 during the quest for Erebor. Smaug, after learning that the men of Laketown are co-conspirators in the dwarven quest to retake the mountain, he decides that he needs to teach them a lesson. He does this by setting Laketown aflame, and to really get his point across, he gets shot down by Bard the Bowman and flattens what is left of the town in his death throes. For Thorin II Oakenshield, it seems like his quest is going to be so successful that he can reclaim the mountain without a single dwarven death. Unfortunately for him, his problems were far from over. Both the survivors of Laketown and the elves of Mirkwood moved on the mountain, both desiring a share of the treasure. Thorin has no desire to negotiate, so he immediately dispatches messages by Raven to both the east and west, hoping to summon any nearby dwarves. His chief hope is in Dain and the Iron Hills, the nearest and strongest dwarven power. As Thorin expected, Durin is quick to react, gathering 500 heavily armed soldiers, many of them veterans of the War of the Dwarves and Orcs. They force march and arrive at Erebor a day earlier than expected. Negotiations quickly break down yet again, and it seems like battle is about to be joined, dwarves against men and elves. Fortunately, an army of orcs arrives. This is probably the only instance where the arrival of orcs has been a fortunate thing. Bolg, the son of Azog, also hearing of Smaug's demise, also decides he wants to claim the treasure of Erebor. Using the mountains and nighttime as cover, he moves his army within striking distance of Erebor before it is spotted. Unfortunately for him, he arrives just in time to interrupt the squabbles of elves, men, and dwarves, and to have them unite against him. What follows is the Battle of the Five Armies, in which Durin and his soldiers play an important role. Despite their best efforts, they are unable to save Thorin, who dies shortly after the battle, and his nephews, Fili and Kili, who die defending him. Their deaths mean the end of the line of Thror, leaving Durin as the new king of Durin's folk, and the new king under the mountain. He is far more reasonable than Thorin, and the treasures of Erebor are dealt out to those who have sufficient claim to them. Durin ends up being an excellent king, and the people of the north prosper once again, just as they had during the reign of Thror many years earlier. With the kingship now established once again at Erebor, it wouldn't be surprising if many of the Longbeards that could be found at places like the Iron Hills or the Blue Mountains relocated back there. That being said, the Iron Hills had never been abandoned in the past, so I doubt that they would have been abandoned when Erebor was retaken. We also don't know who became the new Lord of the Iron Hills. It could have been the title of Thorin III Stonehelm, Durin's heir, or if Durin had a younger son, it might have went to him. Alternatively, it might have went to another lord of Durin's folk. Unfortunately, we don't get any more mentions of the Iron Hills. Outside the appendices, the Iron Hills are not mentioned in the Lord of the Rings. We don't know how the Iron Hills fared or how it contributed during the War of the Ring. We're not sure whether it was attacked or whether it sent troops to aid in the defense of Erebor. Assuming it was still inhabited, it might be a safe bet to say that the peak of the Iron Hills had passed. With Erebor retaken, and knowing that Khazad-dûm was probably restored early in the Fourth Age, the Iron Hills would have dwindled in importance, and as the dwarves dwindle in general, it might be that the Iron Hills was one of the first places to be abandoned. The Fourth Age. Depending on where I'm talking about, the video either ends very uplifting or very depressing. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. Did you know that The Hobbit was the first book I ever read? The dwarves fascinated me, so much so that when I started writing my own shitty little stories, my main characters were dwarves, except they were the height of humans. I remember my mum telling me that it kind of defeated the purpose of them being dwarves if they were that tall. But you know what? The Dwemer in Elder Scrolls are called dwarves, and they're human height, and they're also actually elves, so I'm not the only one that came up with that stupid idea. Cheers, farewell, and remember, the Iron Hills are called that because you can find iron. The Weather Hills are called that because you can find weather?